Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. In this video I'm going to show you a quick and easy way for painting great looking wood. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description. It feels like over the last couple of years I've painted many examples of wood in many of the tutorial videos that I've made on the channel, and they all follow a very similar technique and pattern, and it's generally quite popular. I get a lot of comments about how good it looks and people copying it at home and wanting to know more, etc. And along with that, I've had an awful lot of requests for a separate video, and quite often I'll get asked, well, how did you do that? And then I've got to try and remember a good example from a different painting video. So that's what this video is about. It's about bringing some of those techniques together and presenting them in something a little bit shorter and easier to understand outside of a different, longer painting video. So here in front of me are 4 small pieces of textured wood. These are all parts of a Rohan house kit from Games Workshop. I've primed them black and I'm giving them a zenithal airbrush layer with white here. And I'm giving them a pretty good covering. I'm just making sure that there's enough of the shadow showing through in the recesses of the wood that really aids this method. The whole point of doing this method is to work in an underpainted miniature, and if you're a regular on the channel, you'll know that's my approach to an awful lot of my painting, is to work with underpainting. I appreciate if you don't have an airbrush, this may be a little bit harder to do, but you can replicate it to a certain extent. You can go with a black prime and then just build up with lots of layers of good quality dry brushing. The next stage, even if you have an airbrush, is to do some dry brushing, because I really want to pick up the detail on that wood grain. This is really, really important for the technique as well, to get the most out of it. I'm using a new style roundish dry brush that are really popular at the moment. I'm using a dry palette and I'm removing most of the paint from my brush and giving it a good dry brush all over, trying to pick out just the detail. Now, this isn't a dry brushing tutorial, there's some really good ones out there, but you want to remove more paint than you think you need. You want to feel like you've removed too much paint from the brush and that you have to do too much brushing to get paint on the miniature again, because it's much easier to build up layers rather than have to remove it afterwards, or the worst case scenario when you've got that big lump of paint on your brush and you get that smear and that horrible chalky streaking marks. You don't want any of that. You want to just pick out the details, so you've got this really, really nice whitish greyish scale piece of wood. The next stage is a range of contrast style paints, and I say style because Army Painter Speed Paint, as you can see here, is fantastic, and there are other brands as well. I primarily just use contrast and Army Painter Speed Paint now. They have become my favourites of this kind of paint, but you can use whatever your favourites happen to be. You're mostly using browns, funnily enough, but you'll find that greens are really useful as well. And there are no set recipes. It's a matter of trial and error and playing around. I also use medium and water. For my first mix, I'm using Cygor Brown, Ruddy Fur, Skeleton Horde, and then I always add a green where possible. I'm using Ghillie Dew in this instance, and I'm adding water to each of these colours. Now, for the stronger pigmented colours, I'm adding 50-50 water, and then for the Skeleton Horde, sometimes just a tiny splash. And then the fun part is, this is really easy. I'm just placing it on the miniature randomly and then wet blending them together, allowing them to run together and mix, placing them far apart to start with and slowly starting to fill up the gaps, focusing on the 2 core browns first, and then I go in with a little bit of the Skeleton Horde just to thin and blend it out. Then after I've done that, I start to add in touches of the green as well, and you end up with this sort of beautiful tonal mix of all of these different colours. The key, I think, always is to focus on the 2 core browns, thin with the Skeleton Horde, and add touches of green, not too much, otherwise you'll know it's just a green muddy mess. But it's really important to mix them together while they are still wet on the miniature, because it's that blending together that gives you that really natural, aged looking wood. You're not aiming for something here that's going to be highly polished. This is mostly weathered, realistic looking wood. Now adding Dark Angels Green and Wildwood to my palette as well for a slightly different mix. And like I said at the beginning, it really doesn't matter what these recipes are. You can copy them exactly if you want to, but play around with the colours that you've got and work out your own mixes. And I don't work to set formulas all the time. I just play around with it and grab what I feel is right at the time. This being a colder, darker colour, I'm focusing on that Wildwood, which is a much deeper brown, a cooler brown, and working on that darker green as well. Still mixing in that Skeleton Horde, and I find that I use that in most of the wood mixes because it just softens it and gives you a little bit more variation. So you get very, very similar technique, still blending together while it's wet on the miniature, allowing it to run into all those recesses and the detail. That's very important. If you've got some flat plastic, this won't work. It's designed to work on wood grain on miniatures, and then just blending it together, adding touches of the green, and keep adjusting, keep playing with it. And you can always go back and add some more if they're too thin. It's a little bit harder to fix if it's too thick in the first place. The effect really comes through as they dry, and as you can see, I'm pretty happy with those two there. Different colours of wood, and let's move on and do some more. So now I'm adding some hardened leather, which is a more of an orangey colour, and this one I've decided I'm going to make a lighter coloured wood. So I'm focusing really here on the warmer colours, the redder colours. So we've got the ruddy fur in there as well, and again, as always, the Skeleton Horde, just to blend it together and lighten it up slightly. You can add a little bit of green here if you wanted to, but for this time I'm deciding to leave it off and give a very different colour of wood, something a little bit warmer, like it's maybe being treated or something like that, but still lots of variation. I don't want one flat colour. It would still look fine, but I want to create variation to make it look really realistic. And you can see how thin these paints are and how much of that white is showing through, and the trick really is for these paints to run into those recesses. And Army Painter's Speed Paint is very good for this. Its viscosity is consistently a little bit thinner than the contrast paints. Of course they vary, but they're very good at running into all those recesses. Now let's go for something a little bit darker, a really blackish kind of wood. So I'm using some Grim Black here, which again is an Army Painter's Speed Paint, thinned slightly. And I'm going to focus on using this as the predominant colour, but also mixing in a little bit of that Seigel brown as well, which is also really dark, but it just has a little bit of a reddish tone in there. And again, you can just play around. Mixing in some green is always one of my favourites, and I nearly always do that. And because this is a darker colour here, I've decided to go with the Dark Angels Green. You can imagine something this dark maybe being inside of a filthy, smoky tavern, or maybe just in an industrial town setting, or by some fish docks or something like that somewhere. You can really play around with it and think of all those different examples of wood that you've seen, and go online, search things, look in the real world for different colours of wood and what they look like when they've been weathered, whether they've been treated, and get some sort of inspiration from the real world. You can leave them like that, but I like to now go and give them a little bit of dry brush to really pick them back up in. I've got a white here, I've got a bone colour, and I've got a grey, and it really doesn't matter which ones you use in terms of brands for those colours. I just find that they're the best mixes. So for your warmer colours, you want to use your bones, and then for your black, maybe use the grey, and then the white is a pretty good overall dry brush. And again, next to nothing on that brush. If you put too much paint on, you will spoil all the work you've done, and if you really want to, you can leave it. So in this example, I'm using the bone colour because it works perfectly with that slightly warmer tone of wood. And again, I'm just trying to catch very subtly the detail of the wood grain without removing all of the work that we've done. And there will be a final glaze paint. I will put all of the colours that I've used in a post on my Patreon. It's available to free members. You can obviously pause the screen and note down the paints as I'm using them as well. But if you like them all in one place as a list, they will be there. And in this final example, that black wood, you can see here I'm using the grey paint. And again, just really subtle with the dry brushing. I don't want to ruin all the work that I've done. Just want to reinforce some of that wood grain back. And then the old are. They're looking pretty good as it is, but I want to just filter down and glaze back on top of those to really finish them off. I've got a couple of greens here, and I've got a Skeleton Horde, so it's the lighter colours that I'm going for. But again, like I said, there's no set recipes. Play around. There's all kinds of things you could do here. But I've gone for the lighter green, the darker green, and also the skeleton horde, and I'm adding some medium here, and I'm making this really quite thin, so it's 2 parts medium to 1 part of the contrast or speed paint, and really making them quite thin. And I'm very gently glazing over the top. I'm hardly putting any paint here on my brush at all, just on the tip, and I'm just dragging it over anywhere that I've dry brushed the wood that's looking a little bit light. So I don't necessarily have to glaze over the whole area of wood. I can do it in patches, but it just tones down anything that's looking slightly chalky, like that dry brushing has gone a little bit too far. And I think it just brings it all together and brings some of that life back into it. I always find the most successful way of using this stage is to go for those lighter colours though, rather than glazing with the darker colours. You really want those in the recesses more, and this is really adding a filter to the top, sometimes toning back down, like I said, the dry brushing. If it looks a little bit too chalky, you've gone a little bit too far, you can always rescue it. But most of the time, just adding a little extra filter to it and just sort of rounding it off and really finishing it out. You may not find it's always necessary. It depends on how the dry brush has gone and the context of the piece overall, what else you're painting around it. I'm just showing some little bits of wood here, so that is the whole piece, that's the whole thing you're looking at it. But if it's a part of a building and you've got loads else going on around it, you might not notice. It might just be the back of a shield or something like that, something very, very simple, and you won't go through some of the stages. But here they are all finished anyway. They always look different when they're dry. But it's much easier to see here in the final picture, and I think they look pretty cool. I'm quite happy that there's 4 good examples there of different colours and types of wood. And like I've said many times over in the video already, it's really up to you to play around with the colours that you own and that you've got, and try to get them to work. I do think they're most successful when you've got 3 colours and one of them includes a green, a couple of browns, a skeleton horde, and then a green is always a good combination. So those 4 colours, and you can do an awful lot with it. The skeleton horde is the most useful over all of them. A green or 2 is really handy as well, and then you can mix and match between your sort of cold woods like your wildwood, your Cygor browns, or your lighter browns, your reddish browns, and you really change what you're doing just by playing around with the different wood things. But let me know if you've tried it at home, if you're going to give it a go. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful. Many people have been asking me to make this video for quite a while, and while I've demonstrated all these techniques before in individual videos, as I've already said, it's very nice to have them in one place now, though when someone asks the question, I can drop a link or point them in the direction of this video. So hopefully you found it useful, and maybe you're new and you've come to this video because of it. Hopefully you like the technique. It's obviously not the only way of painting wood. It's just one of many different ways of painting, but it's quite quick and it's quite effective, and it seems to go down well in the videos that I've shown it off before. So hopefully now it's got its own little video that more and more people will see it. So with that in mind, if you're still here and you have enjoyed the video, please do give the video a like, drop a comment below, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. If you'd like to support me even more, please check out my Patreon. There's loads of different tiers on there, from basic support up to painting, coaching, and even tuition online, depending on the tier that you go for. So do go and check those out. There's a link in that video description. There's also a link for the channel sponsor, Counterattack Bases, who make fantastic gaming aids and custom dice as well. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.